The wind off the Thames was bitter cold that November night in 1994, but Thomas McKenzie couldn't feel it anymore. Sitting on the edge of Waterloo Bridge at 2:47 a.m., with his legs dangling over the dark water below, he'd gone numb to everything. The cold, the pain, the crushing weight of a life that had spiraled completely out of control. All he could feel was the emptiness where hope used to be. Thomas was 45 years old, though he looked at least a decade older. The streets had aged him rapidly, carving deep lines around his eyes and turning his hair prematurely gray. He wore a tattered military jacket from his service in Vietnam, the only possession that connected him to the man he used to be. Everything else, his wife, his children, his home, his dignity, was gone. 3 years earlier, Thomas had been a successful construction foreman with a house in Surrey, a loving wife named Margaret, and twin daughters he adored. But the nightmares from Vietnam had never really left him. They'd just been waiting, lurking in the shadows of his mind, until the stress of everyday life finally let them loose. The drinking had started as a way to sleep without dreaming. Just a whiskey before bed, to quiet the voices of dead friends calling his name. But alcohol is a demanding companion, and soon one drink became 5, then 10. Margaret had tried to help, had begged him to get treatment, but Thomas was too proud, too ashamed to admit he was broken. The end had come swiftly and brutally. One night, during a particularly bad episode, Thomas had struck Margaret during an argument. The moment his hand made contact with her face, he saw the fear in her eyes and realized he'd become the enemy he'd once fought against. Margaret had taken the girls and left that very night, filing for divorce and a restraining order within the week. Without his family, Thomas had collapsed entirely. He lost his job due to his drinking, then his house when he couldn't make payments. His few remaining friends grew tired of his self-destructive behavior and gradually disappeared from his life. Within 6 months, he was living on the streets, begging for change and sleeping in doorways. The hardest part wasn't the hunger or the cold or the constant danger. It was the invisibility. People walked past him like he was a piece of litter, their eyes sliding away the moment they noticed him. He'd gone from being a man who built homes for families to being someone those same families hurried their children past on the sidewalk. Tonight was supposed to be the end of all that pain. Thomas had planned it carefully. He'd chosen Waterloo Bridge because it was high enough to ensure success, but also because it held meaning for him. This was where he'd proposed to Margaret in 1971, where they'd brought their daughters to watch fireworks on New Year's Eve. If he was going to die, he wanted it to be somewhere that had once held happiness. He'd spent his last 3 years on a bottle of cheap whiskey, drinking just enough to numb the fear, but not enough to pass out. This had to be his choice, made with a clear mind. He'd written letters to Margaret and the girls, though he had no way to deliver them. They were in his jacket pocket, along with his military discharge papers and a photo of his family taken during happier times. Thomas had been sitting on the bridge railing for over an hour, working up the courage to let go. The Thames flowed silently below him, dark and accepting. Just one moment of falling and all the pain would end. No more nightmares, no more shame, no more being invisible. That's when he heard the footsteps. Someone was walking across the bridge, their boots echoing off the pavement in a steady, unhurried rhythm. Thomas tensed, hoping whoever it was would just walk past like everyone else always did. He didn't want to be seen, didn't want to explain himself, didn't want some well-meaning stranger to delay the inevitable, but the footsteps stopped right behind him. "Bit cold for a midnight stroll, isn't it?" said a gravelly voice with a slight accent that Thomas couldn't quite place. Thomas didn't turn around. "Just enjoying the view," he said quietly. "Yeah, I can see that," the voice replied. "Though from where I'm standing, the view's a bit more interesting than what you're looking at." Despite himself, Thomas was curious. He glanced over his shoulder and saw a man in his late 40s with long, dark hair and a weathered face marked by distinctive moles. He was wearing all black, leather jacket, jeans, boots, and carried himself with the confident swagger of someone who'd lived life on his own terms. The man looked familiar, but Thomas couldn't place him. "You all right, mate?" the stranger asked, moving closer but not close enough to seem threatening. "You look like you've got something heavy on your mind." Thomas turned back toward the water. "I'm fine, just thinking." Dangerous thing, thinking, especially alone at this time of night. The man lit a cigarette, the flame briefly illuminating his face. "Mind if I think with you for a bit? I was heading home, but I'm not in any hurry." There was something in the man's voice that stopped Thomas from telling him to go away. No judgment, no false cheer, just genuine human interest. When was the last time someone had actually wanted to hear what he had to say? "You probably don't want to hear my story," Thomas said. "It doesn't have a happy ending." The stranger laughed, but it wasn't cruel. "Mate, I'm in a band called Motorhead. We specialize in stories without happy endings. Try me." That's when Thomas realized who he was talking to. Lemmy Kilmister, the Prince of Darkness himself. Thomas had been a rock fan in his younger days, had owned every Motorhead album through the early 80s. He'd even seen them live once, in 1981, during a brief leave from his construction job. "You're Lemmy," Thomas said, stating the obvious. "Guilty as charged," Lemmy replied, taking a drag from his cigarette. "And you are?" "Thomas. Thomas McKenzie." "Well, Thomas McKenzie, what brings you to this particular bridge at this particular hour? And please don't tell me you're out for a jog, because that jacket's seen better days." Thomas found himself almost smiling for the first time in months. There was something about Lemmy's straightforward manner that cut through all the bullshit and pretense. Here was someone who clearly didn't believe in sugarcoating anything. "I was in Vietnam," Thomas began, surprising himself by speaking at all. "Came back in '73, tried to put it behind me, build a normal life. Had a wife, 2 daughters, thought I was doing okay." Lemmy moved closer, leaning against the bridge railing but maintaining a respectful distance. "What happened?" The story poured out of Thomas like water through a broken dam. He told Lemmy about the nightmares, the drinking, the gradual destruction of everything he'd tried to build. He talked about hitting Margaret, about losing his family, about the slide from respected citizen to invisible homeless man. He spoke about the shame, the guilt, the crushing loneliness of being truly alone in the world. Lemmy listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding or asking a clarifying question. He didn't offer platitudes or false comfort. He just listened with the attention Thomas hadn't received from another human being in years. "So that's why I'm here," Thomas concluded, gesturing toward the dark water below. "There's nothing left. No family, no job, no home, no future. I'm just taking up space that someone else could use better." Lemmy was quiet for a long moment, finishing his cigarette and flicking it into the Thames. When he spoke, his voice was gentle but firm. "Can I tell you something, Thomas? You're talking to someone who's been written off more times than he can count. Record companies, music critics, even my own bandmates have told me I was finished, washed up, worthless. You know what I learned?" Thomas shook his head. "Other people don't get to decide what you're worth. Not your ex-wife, not your former boss, not the cunts who walk past you on the street like you don't exist. The only person who gets to decide if Thomas McKenzie is finished is Thomas McKenzie." But Lemmy wasn't done. "You know what else? I've been where you are. Maybe not exactly, but close enough. In 1975, I got kicked out of Hawkwind for doing the wrong drugs. Apparently, speed wasn't psychedelic enough for them. I was broke, homeless, sleeping on friends' couches when I could find them. Everyone in the music business said I was done." Lemmy lit another cigarette, the flame revealing the sincerity in his dark eyes. "You know what I did? I formed Motorhead. Not because I thought it would make me rich or famous, but because I had something to say and I wasn't ready to shut up. Sometimes the best music comes from the worst places in your life." Thomas felt something stirring inside him that he hadn't felt in years. Curiosity. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying maybe this isn't the end of your story. Maybe this is the part where everything changes. Maybe you're sitting on this bridge not because you're ready to die, but because you're finally ready to live differently." Lemmy reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a card. "Look, I don't know you from Adam, but I know something about starting over. I also know that sometimes you need someone to believe in you before you can believe in yourself." He handed Thomas the card. "That's the number for a mate of mine, Eddie Pierce. He runs a construction company, and he's always looking for experienced foremen. He's also a vet. Falklands, not Vietnam, but he understands." Thomas took the card with trembling fingers. "Why? You don't even know me." "Because I've been lucky in my life, and luck means fuck all if you don't share it," Lemmy said simply. "Besides, you remind me of my dad. He was in the war too, World War II. Came back different, struggled with things he couldn't talk about. He never got the help he needed." The parallel hit Thomas like a physical blow. "What happened to him?" "He died angry and alone, convinced he was worthless," Lemmy said quietly. "I was too young and stupid to help him then, but I'm not too young or stupid to help you now." What happened next changed everything. Instead of trying to talk Thomas off the bridge immediately, Lemmy did something unexpected. He climbed up onto the railing next to him. "What are you doing?" Thomas asked, alarmed. "If you're going to jump, I'm going with you," Lemmy said calmly. "Because if I let you kill yourself tonight, I'll never forgive myself. So we can both go into that river, or we can both get down and figure out what comes next." Thomas stared at him. "You're insane." "Probably, but I'm also serious. Your choice, Thomas. We both live, or we both die. But either way, you're not doing this alone." For the first time in 3 years, Thomas felt like someone truly saw him, truly cared whether he lived or died. The crushing isolation that had been driving him toward suicide began to crack, just a little. You'd really do that? You'd die for a stranger? Lemmy shrugged. We're not strangers anymore. We're two blokes who've been knocked down by life, sitting on a bridge trying to figure out what to do next. That makes us brothers, in my book. Thomas began to cry. Not the angry, bitter tears he'd shed over his losses, but tears of relief and gratitude and something that might have been hope. Someone cared. Someone saw value in his life even when he couldn't see it himself. I don't know how to start over, Thomas said through his tears. I don't know how to be anything other than what I am right now. Nobody does, Lemmy replied. That's what makes it an adventure instead of a plan. But I'll tell you this. You've already taken the hardest step. What's that? You've decided to keep breathing for another day. Together, they climbed down from the bridge railing. Lemmy took Thomas to an all-night cafe near Waterloo Station, bought him the first hot meal he'd had in weeks, and listened as Thomas continued to talk. They sat in that greasy spoon diner until dawn, two unlikely friends united by their shared understanding of what it meant to be written off by the world. The next day, Lemmy personally drove Thomas to Eddie Pierce's construction office. Eddie, a gruff ex-soldier with kind eyes and hands scarred by years of manual labor, listened to Thomas's story without judgment. He offered him a job on the spot, not charity, but real work with real wages. Everyone deserves a second chance, Eddie said. Sometimes they deserve a third or fourth chance too. More importantly, Eddie helped Thomas find a small flat, nothing fancy, but clean and safe. Lemmy insisted on paying the first month's rent and deposit. It's not charity, Lemmy told Thomas when he tried to protest. It's an investment. When you get back on your feet, you'll help someone else who needs it. That's how this works. The transformation wasn't instant or easy. Thomas struggled with sobriety, with nightmares, with the crushing weight of guilt over what he'd lost. There were days when he wanted to give up, when the old despair threatened to pull him back down. But now he had people who cared. Lemmy checked on him regularly. Eddie became not just a boss, but a friend, and gradually other people entered his life. Lemmy introduced Thomas to Dr. Sarah Morrison, a therapist who specialized in treating veterans with PTSD. For the first time, Thomas had words for what he was experiencing, a framework for understanding that his pain had a name and a treatment. You're not broken, Dr. Morrison told him during one of their sessions. You're wounded, and wounds can heal if you give them proper care. Through therapy, Thomas began to understand that his reactions to Vietnam weren't weakness or moral failing. They were the natural response of a human mind trying to process inhuman experiences. The guilt over hitting Margaret remained, but it transformed from crushing self-hatred into determination never to hurt anyone again. 6 months after the bridge, Thomas did something that surprised everyone. He wrote a letter to Margaret, not asking for forgiveness or trying to justify his actions, but taking full responsibility for the pain he'd caused and letting her know he was getting help. He didn't ask to see her or the girls. He knew he'd forfeited that right, but he wanted her to know that the man who'd hurt her was facing his demons. Margaret's reply when it came 3 weeks later was cautious but kind. She was glad he was getting help, she said. She hoped he could find peace. She wasn't ready to see him, and might never be, but she didn't hate him anymore. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but it was something Thomas could build on. 2 years later, Thomas had transformed his life completely. He was Eddie's senior foreman, respected by his crew, and trusted with the company's most important projects. He had a small but comfortable flat, a few close friends, and a sense of purpose he hadn't felt since before the war. More importantly, he'd found a way to give back. Working with local veterans organizations, Thomas helped other struggling ex-soldiers find jobs and housing. He spoke at support groups, sharing his story and proving that recovery was possible even from the darkest places. Thomas saved more lives by living than he ever would have by dying, Dr. Morrison noted. His story gives other people hope. Lemmy remained a constant presence in Thomas's life, checking in regularly, celebrating milestones, offering support during setbacks. Their friendship was unlikely, but genuine. The rock star and the construction foreman bonded by their shared understanding of life's hardships. But the most incredible moment came in 2015, 21 years after that night on the bridge. Thomas was at a Motorhead concert at Wembley Arena. Lemmy had insisted he take VIP tickets, when something extraordinary happened during the show. Lemmy stopped mid-song and called Thomas up on stage. 21 years ago, Lemmy told the stunned crowd of 50,000 people, I met a man who taught me something important about courage. He was ready to give up on life, but instead he chose to fight for it. Thomas McKenzie, ladies and gentlemen, the bravest bloke I know. The crowd erupted as Thomas, now 66 but standing tall and proud, waved from the stage. But the real surprise came when Margaret and his daughters, now grown women, appeared in the VIP section. They'd been in contact with Thomas for several years by then, slowly rebuilding their relationship, but this was the first time they'd been together at a public event. The reunion was captured by photographers and went viral worldwide. The image of Lemmy embracing Thomas on stage, with Thomas's family watching proudly from the audience, became a symbol of redemption and second chances. The story spread across social media, inspiring countless people who were struggling with their own dark nights of the soul. But for Thomas, the most meaningful moment came after the show, when his daughter Sarah approached him with tears in her eyes. "I'm proud of you, Dad," she said, hugging him tightly. "I'm proud of who you became after you hit bottom." It took courage to climb back up. Lemmy died just weeks after that concert. At his memorial service, Thomas gave a speech that brought the entire gathering to tears. He talked about how one person's kindness had saved not just his life, but the lives of everyone he'd been able to help in the years since. "Lemmy didn't just save me from drowning in the Thames," Thomas said. "He saved me from drowning in despair, and because of that, I was able to throw lifelines to other people who were drowning too." Today, Thomas McKenzie is 75 years old. He's retired from construction, but continues to work with veterans organizations. The Thomas McKenzie Foundation, established with money left to him in Lemmy's will, has helped thousands of homeless veterans find housing, employment, and medical care. The bridge where Lemmy found him now has a small plaque, installed by the City of London after Thomas's story became widely known. It reads, "Sometimes the person who saves you is the one you least expect. If you're thinking of ending it all, please call instead." Below that is the number for a suicide prevention hotline. But perhaps the most important legacy of that night is the ripple effect it created. Thomas estimates that in the 30 years since Lemmy saved him, he's directly helped over 200 veterans get back on their feet. Many of those men and women have gone on to help others, creating a chain of redemption that continues to spread. "Lemmy taught me that heroism isn't about being famous or powerful," Thomas reflects. "It's about being willing to stop and help when you see someone in need. Anyone can be a hero. All it takes is caring enough to act." The homeless man who was ready to die on Waterloo Bridge in 1994 became living proof that it's never too late to start over, that people can change, and that sometimes the person who saves your life is someone you'd never expect. Sometimes the loudest voice in rock and roll belongs to someone who whispers hope into a desperate man's ear in the middle of the night. And sometimes the most powerful song ever written isn't played on a guitar. It's played in the decision to choose life over death, hope over despair, and love over fear.